The galaxy had seen 1,000 species rise. Each one carried its gift into the stars: venom, armor, claws, speed, wings that beat the vacuum into silence. They believed survival was written into the body itself. Strength was biology. Dominion was instinct. And then humanity arrived. The others saw us as a mistake. Soft-fleshed, fragile-boned bipeds with no armor, no venom, no wings. Our skin tore open at the scrape of thorns. Our blood spilled like water. The predators of the Orokai Empire were the first to laugh. "They bruise," one hissed, in their guttural tongue. "They bleed without resistance, a toy species." Their scholars debated whether we were worth enslaving or simply dissecting. In the end, conquest was faster. The invasion began on Cinders Reach, a mining colony at the far edge of the Orion Spur. Human workers watched the sky split open as the Orokai ships descended. Black hulls, burning atmosphere, shrieking metal, panic. Some fled to shelters, some stood with tools in their hands, knowing they were useless. The Orokai warriors marched out in packs, lithe predators, their hides scaled like obsidian plates, eyes burning with hunger. Their weapons pulsed with heat that could carve steel. They mocked as they advanced, calling out to the trembling miners, "Run! Scream! We enjoy the chase!" The first human they struck down was a woman named Alvarez. She carried only a pickaxe. The Orokai's blade cut her clean across the chest. She fell gasping, blood pumping from her body. And here's the thing, that should have been the end. For any prey species, pain is defeat. Pain is surrender. But Alvarez did not stop. With lungs collapsing, with ribs shattered, she still dragged herself forward and swung the pickaxe into the alien's leg. The crack of bone echoed across the valley. The Orokai howled. It was not a killing blow, not even close, but it was enough. Enough for the others to see, enough to show that pain did not break her. That pain was fuel. When Alvarez finally collapsed, dying in the dust, the others rose, not with weapons of war. They had none, but with fists, with rocks, with jagged tools. The Orokai laughed at first. They slashed open flesh, expecting surrender. But every wound only made the humans fight harder. The predators had never seen such a thing. To them, pain was a signal to retreat, to protect the body. To humans, it was a trigger. Something ancient in the nervous system twisted agony into defiance. Bleeding, staggering, screaming, they fought anyway. By nightfall, the ground was red. Dozens of miners dead. But so were Orokai. Their corpses lay broken in the dirt, skulls caved in by hammers and shattered rock drills. The hunters had bled, and that was not supposed to happen. Word of the skirmish spread fast through the Orokai fleet. They spoke of it as a curiosity. "The prey resists," one commander sneered, "a final reflex before extinction." Their laughter carried through the comms, sharp as blades, but beneath the laughter, something else stirred. Unease, because Alvarez's name spread faster than their victory. Across the colonies, whispered in bunkers and dark barracks, one phrase carried like fire through dry grass. She kept fighting. The Orokai tried to stamp it out. They slaughtered villages, flayed survivors as warnings, but every act of brutality only made the whispers grow louder. Humans began to understand what we were, what had been hidden inside our fragile bodies all along. Our weakness was our weapon, pain was our crucible. The Orokai came again the next week, this time with full strike teams. They descended into the slums of Argo City, sneering, their claws dripping with anticipation, And there they met Sergeant Marcus Hale. He had no illusions. His platoon had no chance. His rifle's charge would run dry in minutes. He looked at his soldiers, bleeding already, half-trained, terrified, and he told them something simple. They think bleeding means we're finished. Prove them wrong. The battle was chaos, streets collapsing into fire, screams echoing off. The ferocrete. Hale fought until 3 of his ribs snapped. When an Orokai blade cut into his thigh, he didn't fall back. He dragged the warrior close and spat blood into its eyes before driving a knife through its throat. Each injury only made him fight harder. Each scream only rallied his squad. When Hale finally dropped, leg mangled, chest heaving, his soldiers carried him forward like a banner. The Orokai broke that day, not because they were outnumbered, not because they lacked weapons, but because, for the first time in their history, they saw prey that would not stop. Prey that bled and still came forward. The Orokai retreated from Argo City. Not far, not forever, but enough. Enough for the galaxy to take notice. Other empires listened. At first, with derision. A spectacle, they said. An amusing suicide of a young species. But in the darker corners of their war councils, the tone shifted. If pain could not break humanity, what could? Because here was the truth no one wanted to admit. Humanity was weak. Laughably weak. But weakness gave birth to something the galaxy had never seen. A refusal to die, a refusal to stop. Every cut only carved the will deeper, every scar only hardened the flesh. Every drop of blood became a weapon, because it carried the message Alvarez had left with her final breath. We do not stop. And so the galaxy began to whisper. The Orokai's hunters, once arrogant, began to avoid human patrols. Small units refused to engage without overwhelming numbers. Fear crept into their voices when they spoke the word human. But the Orokai command would not yield. Their pride was older than empires. To them, the humans were still insects, annoying, persistent, but destined to die. They would make an example. They gathered their fleets, thousands of ships bristling with weapons, shadows blotting out the stars. Their warlord addressed them with cold fire in his voice. We will show these animals the futility of defiance. We will drown their world in their own blood. And as the first armada set its course for Earth, humanity prepared, not with victory in mind, not with illusions of survival, but with something simpler, something stronger. We prepared to endure, because we had learned the truth. Pain was not our weakness, pain was our weapon. The fleets drew closer. Earth waited, and the galaxy leaned in to watch, mocking, curious, fearful, as the predators closed in on the fragile species that refused to kneel. And in the silence before the invasion began, Sergeant Hale, scarred, limping, broken but unbowed, said, "The words that would carry us into the fire, let them come." The skies began to burn. The Orokai Armada approaches Earth, convinced this will be a final extermination, but humanity now knows what we are. The Orokai Armada fell upon the solar system like a storm of knives. Thousands of ships, each bristling with weapons, each dripping with the arrogance of a predator that had never known defeat. They moved with the precision of butchers, confident that the slaughter to come would be clean, efficient, absolute. They expected panic. They expected humans to scatter like vermin, clawing for holes to hide in. They expected us to weep at the sight of their fleets blotting out the stars. But Earth did not scatter. We stood still. Cities fell silent as if the entire planet held its breath. Soldiers tightened the straps on battered armor. Civilians filled shelters carved into bedrock. Not because we believed the shelters would save us, but because we wanted the Orokai to bleed for every street they took. From orbit, Earth looked unchanged. Green oceans, white clouds, scarred continents glowing with fragile lights. But beneath the surface, something older stirred. We were not born of steel and fire like the Orokai. We were born of endurance. We had lived through ice ages, plagues, wars that devoured continents. Survival was not technology, it was memory, written in bone. The first strike fell on Lagos. 100 ships descended in formation, their bombardment tearing skyscrapers into dust. Fire rolled across the city. The Orokai warriors landed amidst the ruins, their blades gleaming, their laughter echoing. They expected screams. What they found was silence. From the rubble rose men and women burned, bloodied, coughing through smoke. They carried rifles scavenged from wreckage, pistols that jammed, blades pulled from kitchens. Every one of them should have been dead already, but they moved forward. An Orokai warrior slashed open a boy's side, expecting him to collapse. Instead, he dragged himself up and drove a broken bottle into the alien's throat before he bled out on the pavement. Another soldier, her arm shattered, switched hands and kept firing until she fell. The Orokai called them suicides. But when the battle was done, when the last human fighter had finally gone still, hundreds of Orokai corpses littered the ground. Their commanders stared at the bloodied streets in disbelief. This was not resistance. This was defiance. News of Lagos spread through the fleet. More cities fell: Manila, Cairo, São Paulo. Each time the Orokai expected an easy culling. Each time they left with scars, because humanity did not surrender when cut down. We surged forward, bleeding, clawing, screaming. The Orokai began to notice something terrifying. Pain made us more dangerous. A soldier with broken ribs fought harder than one unscathed. A woman with half her body burned still dragged grenades beneath an enemy tank. The more we bled, the more we struck back. For the first time in their history, the Orokai began to hesitate. On the 5th day, the Armada descended on New York. The city was empty, or seemed so. Streets silent, windows shattered, smoke drifting. The Orokai laughed as they advanced, claws scraping against concrete. "Where are your heroes now?" they mocked. "Where are your martyrs?" Then the first shot rang out from the ruins. The trap closed. Entire blocks collapsed as humans detonated charges buried in subway tunnels. Orokai squads fell into fire. From hidden bunkers, soldiers surged upward, screaming, bleeding, wielding rifles wrapped in rags. The Orokai cut them down in droves. But the humans never stopped coming. A commander, scarred and furious, shouted across the battlefield, "Why do you not fall? Why do you not break?" Sergeant Hale answered, limping forward on his ruined leg, rifle in one hand, knife in the other. His voice was ragged but steady. "Because pain is all we've ever known." The commander struck him down, blade raking across his chest. Hale staggered, coughing blood. He should have fallen. Instead, he dragged the alien into his own wound, pulling it close, teeth clenched, whispering the words into its ear as he drove the knife home. "And we've learned to use it." The Orokai broke ranks that day. Not all of them, not everywhere. But in New York, the impossible happened. The predators retreated. Their commanders called it a strategic withdrawal. But their soldiers knew the truth. They had faced prey that would not die, and fear had taken root. Across the galaxy, Whispers grew. Traders told stories in shadowed ports. Mercenaries passed rumors between drinks. They spoke of fragile bipeds who fought on broken legs, who fought with their gut hanging open, who fought until the ground itself was slick with blood. The galaxy laughed at first. They said the stories were exaggerations. They said no prey species could turn pain into a weapon. But the laughter carried a tremor, a question buried beneath mockery. What if it's true? The Orokai High Command raged. Their warlord struck down. Advisors who dared to mention hesitation. "Fear is disease," he thundered. "We will cure it with blood." He ordered the full fleet to Earth, to burn the planet to ash. But even as their ships aligned, cracks spread in their confidence. Younger warriors, scarred from Lagos or New York, began to whisper in their barracks. Some refused orders, some drank until their claws shook. They dreamed of human faces twisted in pain, not pleading, but smiling through bloodied teeth. And, in the shelters beneath Earth, humanity listened. We knew the storm was not finished. The Orokai were not broken, not yet. But we had tasted their fear. And once fear is tasted, it grows. On the seventh night, the sky over Earth split open again. The Armada descended in full force, fire burning across continents. Cities crumbled, oceans boiled, the ground shook with bombardment. Humanity bled in rivers. But we did not stop. Every wound became a weapon. Every death became fuel. In trenches, in tunnels, in burning ruins, humans learned the rhythm. Strike, bleed, rise, strike again. Soldiers passed rifles to children when their hands were too broken to hold them. Medics stitched wounds in the dirt with thread torn from their own clothes. Civilians hurled firebombs into armored columns and died laughing in the blaze. The Orokai expected screams of despair. What they heard instead was silence, then laughter, then the sound of footsteps still advancing through fire. A predator's nightmare had come alive, and in the heart of the ruins something darker was stirring. For humanity had realized something terrifying, even to ourselves. There was no limit. Pain did not weaken us. Pain sharpened us. The Orokai had given us everything we needed to win. They had given us the blade, and we were learning to turn it back against them. The warlord himself prepared to land. His ship cut the sky like a black sun, descending toward Earth's burning surface. He would crush the resistance personally. He would show his warriors there was nothing to fear. But as his ship pierced the clouds, as the flames of a dying city lit the hull, his soldiers looked out the viewport, and they froze, because through the smoke and ruin they saw them. Humans. Thousands of them. Limbs mangled, faces burned, bodies broken, still standing, still advancing, silent, bleeding, eyes burning like coals. The Orokai commander turned to his warlord, voice trembling. They should be dead. And the warlord, for the first time, did not laugh. The Orokai warlord arrives on Earth, ready to crush humanity himself. But even he feels the first touch of fear as his soldiers witness the impossible. Humans who will not die, no matter how much they bleed. The warlord of the Orokai descended into the fire. His name was Shrakul, the scaled tyrant, predator of 100 conquests. His armor was black stone fused with flesh, his claws tipped in molten steel. For centuries, his name had silenced entire systems. He had never been denied. He had never known fear. He came to Earth not to win. That was inevitable, he thought, but to erase the stain of hesitation that had begun to spread among his warriors. He would show them that humans were not demons. They were prey. Weak, fragile, forgettable prey. His landing craft burned through the smoke, slamming into the ruins of New York. The ramp hissed open. Out he strode, towering, vast, radiating the confidence of a god. His warriors followed, their eyes fixed on him, desperate for reassurance. And then the silence fell. The humans stood before him, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, in the blasted remains of the city. Their bodies were broken, limbs bound with cloth, faces half-burned, eyes swollen shut. Blood dripped from open wounds that should have killed them hours ago. Yet still they stood, weapons trembling in their hands, jaws clenched, eyes fixed on him. Shrakul laughed, a sound like metal grinding against stone. "Is this your army? Shattered husks and bleeding meat? You insult me." He raised his blade and pointed it at the closest soldier, a girl who couldn't have been more than 20. Her arm was gone below the elbow. The stump was wrapped in cloth, soaked through. Yet she didn't lower her rifle. She didn't look away. Shrakul's grin faltered only for a second, but his warriors saw it. The humans didn't shout, didn't roar, didn't beg. They simply advanced, step by step, like a tide of ghosts. Shrakul charged. His blade tore through 3 at once. They fell, bleeding, broken, and still, hands clutching at him, dragging him down with their dying strength. Others swarmed, firing rifles, swinging pipes, throwing themselves against his armor. He cut them apart. Each swing killed, each strike sent bodies flying, but every death only fed the fire. Humans clawed at his armor with bare hands, ripping away scales even as they died. One, his chest split open, drove a knife between Shrakul's ribs before collapsing. Another grabbed the warlord's arm, screamed through blood-filled lungs, and held on until his bones snapped like twigs. Shrakul roared. He had faced armies. He had crushed champions, but never had his enemies refused to stop. Even as his armor dripped with their blood, even as the ground turned into a red swamp, they kept coming. The Orokai warriors behind him shifted uneasily. This was not a battle. This was madness. Prey should flee. Prey should die quietly. But these humans fought like pain itself had been forged into a blade. One of Shrakul's lieutenants whispered, "They do not fear us." Shrakul cut him down without looking. "Then you will fear me in their place." But his voice trembled. Because even he could feel it now, the cracks in certainty, the taste of something alien in his throat. The humans would not yield. No matter how deep he cut, no matter how many he tore apart, they would not stop. And when he looked into their eyes, he did not see prey. He saw mirrors. Every strike he landed was matched by a grip that dragged him closer, by a laugh that bubbled through broken teeth, by whispers rasped from bloodied throats. More. Again. Is that all you have? By nightfall, the ruins were a graveyard. Human corpses lay in heaps. Shrakul himself was scarred, his armor shredded, his body bleeding ichor. He had killed more enemies in one day than in any campaign before, and yet he felt no triumph. Because still, in the shadows of the burning city, the humans gathered, bleeding, shattered, silent, waiting. For the first time in his life, the scaled tyrant withdrew. He called it a tactical retreat, ordering bombardments to cover the withdrawal. But his warriors knew. They had seen him bleed. They had seen his steps falter. They had seen the impossible. Their god made flesh stumble before prey. The Orokai fleet shuddered with whispers. Fear spread like infection. And beyond Earth, the galaxy listened. The Veari, the serpent traders of the Perseus arm, scoffed at the stories but refused to send mercenaries against humans. The Korthan warbroods laughed, but their commanders quietly updated invasion simulations. Everywhere the tales spread. A warlord had faced the fragile bipeds and left with scars. It was unthinkable. On Earth, survivors gathered in the rubble. Fires burned, smoke thick in the sky. Thousands dead. Cities turned to ash. But the humans still alive looked at each other with something beyond grief. They looked with hunger because they had seen it. The warlord could bleed. Sergeant Hale lay in a field hospital, chest wrapped in bandages, breath ragged. He had watched Shrakul retreat with his own eyes, and as medics begged him to rest, he only rasped one sentence, over and over, until every soldier around him carried it in their bones. He bled. He bled. The Orokai tried again. They struck Moscow, Mumbai, Santiago. Each battle cost humanity rivers of blood. But each battle left scars on the predators. Ambushes in tunnels. Suicide charges in burning fields. Soldiers who fought with bones protruding, who crawled forward on shattered legs. The more we suffered, the harder we became. The galaxy began to understand the horror. Humanity was not a species that won through strength. Humanity was a species that turned suffering into fuel. The Orokai thought they were burning us alive. In truth, they were forging us. But Shrakul would not accept it. His pride was iron. He swore before his council that he would break humanity, grind us until nothing remained but ash. And yet, in the dark corners of his ship, when no one could hear, his claws trembled. His dreams filled with faces. Not of the strong, not of the armored, but of the broken, the girl with one arm who had raised her rifle, the soldier who spat blood into his face, the countless others who had smiled through their agony. He began to wake in cold sweat. He began to feel something he had no word for, but humanity knew it well. It was fear. The galaxy begins to whisper that the unthinkable has happened. The Orokai warlord himself bled before humans. Shrakul vows to break us, but his dreams are haunted. Humanity, scarred and staggering, sees the cracks forming in their enemy's pride. The Orokai warlord dreamed of blood. He dreamed of teeth clenched through broken jaws, of hands clutching at him long after they should have fallen limp. He dreamed of eyes staring back at him with no fear, no surrender, only hunger. He woke with his claws gouged into the walls of his chamber, ichor dripping from his palms. Shrakul had fought 1,000 wars. He had slaughtered predators with fangs sharper than his, hunted prey with armor thick as tanks. None of them haunted him. None of them lingered in the silence of his mind. But the humans would not leave. His warriors saw it. They did not speak of it aloud. Fear of their warlord still outweighed the infection creeping through their ranks, but they whispered in the barracks. Some sharpened their blades until they snapped, their hands shaking. Others drank until their tongues were numb. Entire units refused to deploy without overwhelming numbers. The word was spreading like a contagion. Humans do not stop. On Earth, the war burned hotter. The Orokai had unleashed their fleets, burning cities from orbit, leveling mountains with plasma fire. Entire regions became wastelands. Ash clouds rolled across continents. Oceans boiled into storms, and still the humans fought. In Moscow, survivors wove nets of steel cable through ruins, dragging Orokai war machines into pits where soldiers detonated themselves with homemade bombs. In Santiago, civilians lit the night sky with firebombs, charging tanks with nothing but iron rods. In Mumbai, an old man led a mob with kitchen knives into the teeth of a predator platoon, his body riddled with blades before he dragged their commander down with him. Every city became a graveyard. Every graveyard became a rallying ground. Sergeant Hale, half his body wrapped in bandages, was carried into battle on a stretcher. He couldn't walk anymore, but his voice still carried. His soldiers dragged him from front to front, and wherever he appeared, humanity fought harder. "They bleed," he rasped. "Remember that. Make them bleed." He spoke little else. He didn't need to. The Orokai command tried to smother the fire with terror. They unleashed horrors from their breeding pits, hounds with claws like spears, airborne predators with wings. That blotted out the sun. They set entire cities ablaze, laughing through the screams, but their laughter cracked, because every horror only forged a darker kind of courage. Humans began to wear the skins of fallen beasts, carrying their claws as trophies. Soldiers cut down in battle left behind comrades who picked up their weapons without hesitation. Pain passed from hand to hand like a torch, and the galaxy watched. The Vayari traders stopped scoffing. Their ships began to avoid Orokai patrols. The Korthan warbrutes sent envoys to observe battles firsthand. Even the aloof, eerie Dominion, silent for centuries, began to stir. The whispers were becoming too loud to ignore. On the 15th day, the Orokai struck Chicago. Their fleet pounded the city into rubble, then descended with tens of thousands of warriors. It was meant to be a demonstration, a final crushing blow to erase hesitation. Instead, it became the place where hesitation turned to dread. The battle began as the others had, fire and blood. But the humans did not fight in lines. They bled into the ruins, vanished into tunnels, struck from shadows. Every Orokai squad that advanced lost 2 or 3 to traps, grenades, knives in the dark. Every victory cost. The Orokai commander snarled into his comms, "Find their leaders, cut them down and the rest will break." But when his soldiers dragged Hale into view, strung up on a broken wall, the opposite happened. He was barely alive, his chest wrapped in blood-soaked cloth, one arm useless, his body trembling with fever. The Orokai mocked him, slashing fresh wounds into his skin, expecting screams. Hale looked at them through swollen eyes. He laughed, a ragged, broken sound. Blood dripped from his lips as he whispered, "Is that all?" The words spread faster than fire. Humans in the ruins heard them, carried them, shouted them into the night. "Is that all?" The Orokai pressed harder. The humans pressed harder still. By dawn, Chicago was ash, but in the ash, thousands of Orokai corpses rotted beside the humans. They had tried to break. Shrakul himself watched the battle from orbit, his claws dug into the armrests of his throne. Every death should have been triumph, but all he saw was the truth. The more humans suffered, the stronger they became. His fleet was bleeding out. His warriors were whispering louder. Fear was no longer infection, it was epidemic. One of his generals spoke aloud the thought others only dared to whisper. Perhaps it is not weakness. Perhaps their pain is power. The warlord struck him down, but the words lingered. On the 20th day, the Orokai changed tactics. They withdrew from direct slaughter and began targeting infrastructure, dams, power plants, food reserves. They thought starvation would succeed where fire had failed, but humans had survived famines before. Hunger only sharpened the edge. Starving. Children fought with stones. Mothers carried rifles on empty stomachs. Soldiers went days without food, and still they advanced. Shrakul realized something chilling. Pain was infinite. Hunger, fire, poison, wounds, none of it broke them. Each trial only carved them sharper. And then came the breaking point. In the ruins of what had been Berlin, a final Orokai assault descended. They marched through fire, weapons ready, eager to crush the last human holdouts. They found not an army, but a line. A single line of soldiers, ragged uniforms hanging from broken bodies, men and women barely able to stand, some leaning on rifles like crutches, some missing eyes, some coughing blood. They should have been pitiful, they should have been pathetic, but when the Orokai advanced, the humans did not retreat. They did not falter. They stepped forward, as one, bleeding into the dirt. The Orokai hesitated. Then they fired. The humans fell. Others rose in their place, again and again, a line that refused to vanish. The Orokai began to shake. Their commander shouted for them to advance, but their claws would not move, because in that moment they understood the truth. They were no longer hunters. They were prey, and the humans knew it too. On the ruins of Berlin, Orokai warriors freeze, unable to face the line of bloodied humans who refuse to fall. The predator-prey order is breaking, and humanity is about to turn the war. The line at Berlin broke the Orokai, not in body. Thousands of humans still fell, their corpses scattered across the ruins, but in spirit. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the predators could not bring themselves to advance. They stood frozen, weapons trembling, as a line of half-dead humans staggered forward, step after step, refusing to vanish. One soldier, chest torn open, pressed his rifle to his own wound to steady it and fired until the barrel glowed red. Another, blind in both eyes, followed the sound of his comrade's boots and kept swinging his knife until his hand was hacked off. Even as they died, their voices carried hoarse and unrelenting. "Is that all? Is that all?" the Orokai commander screamed at his warriors. He slashed down 3 of his own troops for refusing to move, but the damage was done. Fear had taken root in their marrow. They did not see prey anymore. They saw something worse. Shrakul watched from orbit, his claws digging furrows into stone. His fleet was still vast, his armies still countless. Yet for the first time he felt control slipping away. His warriors avoided his gaze. Some flinched when humans appeared on their view screens. It was not supposed to be this way. Pain was weakness. That was the law of the universe. Yet here was a species that turned agony into fire, scars into banners. Every wound the Orokai dealt only made the humans fight harder. Every city burned only became another battlefield. And now the predators hesitated. On Earth, the survivors of Berlin crawled from the ashes. They should have been broken. They should have collapsed into despair. Instead, they carried a new kind of silence, not grief, not exhaustion, a silence that felt like iron sharpening against stone. Word spread fast. The Orokai had faltered. Humanity had stood unbroken. For the first time since the war began, hope bloomed. Not the fragile hope of survival, but the defiant hope of victory, Sergeant. Hale, carried on a stretcher through the rubble, whispered the truth to every soldier who would listen. They fear us now, don't you feel it? They fear us. And the soldiers did feel it. It was in the way Orokai patrols pulled back when ambushed. It was in the way their fire grew frantic when humans closed the distance. It was in the way even Shrakul's voice cracked when he ordered fresh assaults. The predators had bled, and once predators bleed, the illusion shatters. The next battle came in the ruins of Johannesburg. The Orokai descended in force, determined to crush resistance. But when their scouts entered the city, they found streets lined with corpses, human corpses, laid out in silence. It was a trap. The moment the Orokai advanced, the corpses rose, not alive, never alive, but rigged with explosives triggered by the footsteps of their killers. The blast ripped entire platoons apart, and through the smoke came the living, covered in the blood of the dead, charging with knives and rifles. The Orokai screamed in horror. Not at the bombs, at the humans themselves, who had used their own dead as weapons, who had turned grief into blades. Whispers spread through the fleet. The word demon appeared for the first time in Orokai tongues. They no longer called us prey. They no longer called us weak. They called us something else, something older and darker, and the galaxy listened. The Vayari traders, once scoffing, began selling weapons to humans in secret. The Korthan warbroods, once laughing, started offering mercenaries to fight alongside us. Even the distant Eerie Dominion, cloaked in mystery for centuries, sent emissaries to study the battles. The galaxy was shifting. The prey had become a storm, but Shrakul would not yield. His pride was older than reason. He gathered his council. Aboard his flagship, his voice echoing like thunder. You whisper of fear. You speak of demons, I say this, they are flesh, they bleed. And if they bleed, they can die. We will erase this infection before it spreads. But even as he spoke, he felt the weight of his words sag. He remembered their eyes. He remembered the girl with one arm raising her rifle. He remembered the laughter of men bleeding from mortal wounds, and his claws trembled. On Earth, humanity pushed harder. Guerrilla war became open assault. Soldiers who should have been bedridden marched into fire. Civilians turned ruins into fortresses. Every scar became a story, every drop of blood a rallying cry. In Rio de Janeiro, a boy of 15 fought with a leg mangled beyond repair, dragging himself forward on his elbows while firing a stolen Orokai pistol. He lived long enough to kill 3 predators before one tore him apart. His name spread through the resistance like wildfire. In Warsaw, a mother cradled her dying child, then picked up the rifle he dropped and fought until she was riddled with blades. Her final words, "Don't stop," were repeated across a continent. And in the mountains of Nepal, soldiers carried Hale up the slopes, his body half dead, but his eyes burning. From a peak, he looked down at the burning world and whispered, "They thought pain was their weapon. They never knew it was ours." The Orokai grew desperate. Their fleets tightened their grip. Their warlords drove soldiers harder. Punishments for hesitation became executions. But nothing stopped the rot. Warriors went into battle shaking. Some tore off their insignia. Some deserted outright. The shift had begun. In the 43rd night of the war, at a battle near the ruins of Kyoto, it happened. A squad of Orokai warriors faced a handful of humans, bloodied, broken, barely able to stand. The humans advanced anyway. The Orokai should have slaughtered them. Instead, the predators dropped their weapons. They fled. Desertion, once unthinkable, became plague. Entire units vanished into the dark. Some whispered of fleeing to the edges of the galaxy. Others spoke of joining the humans rather than facing them. The empire that had ruled with terror now trembled in terror, and still Shrakul refused to admit it. He roared across the comms, his voice filled with rage. "You shame yourselves! You shame me! Fight them! They are nothing but bleeding animals!" But his warriors had seen the truth. The bleeding animals had teeth. The bleeding animals had fire. The bleeding animals would not stop. And now it was the predators who were running out of blood. The Orokai army begins to collapse from within. Warriors deserting, fear spreading like plague. Humanity, forged in agony, is no longer prey. But Shrakul, pride unbroken, prepares one last plan to crush the species that has turned the galaxy upside down. Shrakul could not sleep. The warlord of the Orokai paced the length of his chamber, claws scraping grooves into the metal floor. For the first time in centuries of conquest, he felt something colder than rage in his gut: fear. Reports piled in, each worse than the last. Desertion spreading like a sickness, ships abandoning fleets, entire legions refusing to deploy. A word, echoed again and again in intercepted transmissions: humans. It was no longer said with mockery. It was said with a tremor, like a curse. Shrakul slammed his claws against the wall until sparks flew. "They bleed," he muttered. "They die. They are mortal." But the lie could not erase the memory, the sight of prey that did not break. Prey that staggered forward with jaws clenched. Prey that laughed while bleeding out. His empire had built itself on the certainty that terror ruled all creatures. Now terror had been taken from him. The council begged him to retreat, to consolidate. Lesser warlords whispered of abandoning Earth, leaving the humans to their ashes. But Shrakul's pride was a mountain. He would not descend, he would not yield. Instead, he gathered his high command and spoke words that froze even his own soldiers. "We will end this species in one fire, their cities, their oceans, their very crust. If fear has failed, annihilation will speak. We will make Earth itself bleed." The plan was simple, terrible. The Orokai would unleash the scourge bombs, planet-cracking warheads forbidden even by their own laws of conquest. Until now, no species had ever provoked such rage. But humans had clawed at his empire's foundation. Pride demanded spectacle. The fleet prepared. Thousands of vessels converged in high orbit, the bombs drawn from vaults sealed for millennia. Each one was the size of a mountain, their cores pulsing with the energy of chained stars. On Earth, the resistance learned of it too late. Intercepted signals revealed the truth. Earth would not merely burn, it would be shattered. Panic rippled through the survivors. For all their defiance, no human could fight a star's death. They could bleed and endure, but they could not withstand the end of their planet. Sergeant Hale, skeletal and scarred, listened to the news in silence. His body was failing him, his lungs ragged, his blood poisoned by Orokai venom. Yet his voice carried steel. "They want to erase us," he rasped. "So we'll show them why they can't." The resistance turned desperate. Every scientist left alive, every engineer, every hacker dragged from hiding, forced into feverish work. They studied the scourge bomb's transmissions, their activation codes, their fail-safes. Humanity had no ships left that could fight the Orokai fleet in open battle, but sabotage. That was a language humans spoke fluently. Sleepless nights passed in bunkers. Blood bought time as soldiers hurled themselves into suicide missions to distract advancing troops. Civilians dug tunnels, carried messages, fed the last fighters, and finally a plan emerged. A mad, impossible plan. They would not stop the bombs. They would hijack them. The Orokai had designed the Scourge bombs to respond only to their warlord's commands. But the humans discovered something hidden. Every bomb contained a fail-safe key in case of mutiny. And the codes to that fail-safe were buried in the fleet's command ship. It would mean one thing: someone had to infiltrate the flagship itself. A suicide run. Hale volunteered first, though he could barely stand. His comrades refused. Instead, a small team of soldiers stepped forward, men and women held together by bandages, steel plates, and sheer fury. They carried more scars than skin, more ghosts than breath. "Let us," one of them said simply. "We're already dead, might as well make it count." The night before the mission, silence swept the resistance camps. No songs, no speeches. Just the quiet knowledge that this was the knife's edge. If they failed, Earth cracked in two. If they succeeded, the Orokai would choke on their own weapon. Above the planet, the Orokai fleet glittered like a wall of blades. Shrakul himself stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Earth's clouds drift beneath. His claws itched for the final order. He wanted to see the humans' faces when their skies ignited. The strike team launched at dawn. A stolen Orokai shuttle, painted with human blood to mask its scars, drifted toward the flagship. To the fleet, it was one more supply vessel among thousands. To the humans inside, it was a coffin with wings. They breached the hangar under alarms. The Orokai guards laughed at first, until the humans opened fire with a fury that made mockery die in their throats. Bullets tore through armor, blades hacked at limbs, grenades ripped steel apart. Every step cost blood, but the soldiers advanced anyway, wounds ignored, pain burned into fuel. The corridors shook with their passage. The Orokai screamed warnings across comms. "They are inside! The humans are inside!" For Shrakul, the words felt like poison. They had crawled into his very heart, his ship, his throne. His pride, he roared, drawing his warblade, and stormed to meet them himself. The humans reached the command chamber, 6 left from the dozen who began. One dragged a shattered leg, another's arm hung by threads of muscle, yet they moved as if nothing could stop them. They tore into the consoles, blood dripping onto circuits, fingers slamming commands they barely understood. Codes flashed, keys unlocked, the Scourge bombs shuddered awake. The humans turned them not outward, but upward, and suddenly Shrakul saw it, the impossible. His fleet's greatest weapons, built to erase prey, now turned against the predators themselves. He charged the soldiers, his blade cleaving through one, then another. He was strength incarnate, towering, furious, but even as he slaughtered, the humans did not flinch. One dying soldier clutched his ankle and snarled, blood in his teeth. Too late, and the bomb icons on the screens shifted from red to green. Shrakul froze, horror flooding his veins. The humans had done it. They had armed the bombs to target him, his fleet, his empire. The chamber filled with alarms. Across the fleet, captains screamed, ships scattered, but there was no time. The weapons had awakened, and their hunger could not be caged. The humans lay dying on the floor, but their eyes glowed with a final, terrible triumph. One whispered, with his last breath, "Bleed with us." And then the Scourge bombs began their countdown. The Scourge bombs, meant to destroy Earth, are now aimed at the Orokai fleet. Shrakul faces annihilation at the hands of his own weapon, hijacked by dying humans who refuse to let him win. The seconds tick down, the countdown thundered across the Orokai fleet. 10, 9, 8. Shrakul stood frozen in his command chamber, surrounded by alarms and blood. The humans lay scattered at his feet, corpses twisted, armor cracked open. Yet even dead, their eyes seemed to stare through him, as if they had dragged him into their grave. 7, 6, 5. The fleet broke into chaos. Captains screamed. Into comms, warriors abandoned stations. Entire squadrons tried to scatter from orbit. But the Scourge bombs were chained to the flagship's signal. No ship could escape their reach. 4, 3, 2. Shrakul's claws dug into the console.
"Override!" he bellowed. "Obey me!" But the screens flickered with static, his commands rejected. The humans had gutted his codes.
The failsafe he once thought a leash for mutiny had been twisted into his noose. 1. The first bomb ignited. There was no flash, no fireball. Not at first. Instead, the air itself seemed to collapse inward, folding, crushing, until light bent into a screaming singularity. And then the sky tore open. The detonation ripped through the fleet like judgment. Warships shattered as if made of glass. Armor crumpled, engines split apart. Entire cruisers were drawn screaming into the artificial gravity well. The Scourge bombs were not weapons of war. They were extinction devices. In minutes, half the fleet was gone. In 10, 3/4. From the ground, humanity watched in silence. Survivors crawled out of bunkers, soldiers leaned on rifles, children clutched their mothers. Above them, the stars themselves seemed to fall, flaming wreckage raining into oceans and forests. The sky was filled with dying predators. For the first time, the Orokai did not look like gods. They looked like animals, trapped, bleeding, hunted by their own arrogance, but the destruction was not clean. Fragments slammed into Earth, setting cities ablaze, crushing valleys, boiling seas. Humanity had saved itself from annihilation, but the price was fresh scars carved into the very bones of the planet. In the command chamber, Shrakul stood amid ruin. His ship buckled, fires devouring the walls, consoles sparking into darkness. The humans he had slain seemed to whisper in the flames. "Bleed with us!" He roared and staggered to the viewport. What he saw made his chest hollow. His empire's pride, his endless fleet, his symbol of dominance, reduced to drifting debris and dying screams. It was impossible. It was obscene. A prey species had struck down a predator god, yet still he lived. And as long as he drew breath, his pride refused to
"Die!"
He swore then, voice low and guttural, that he would carry this war into the marrow of humanity. On the ground, words spread like wildfire. Soldiers in the rubble of Berlin wept with laughter. Civilians in the tunnels of Chicago clutched one another, whispering prayers of vengeance. Across every ruin the same phrase took hold: "We did it. Not victory, not yet, but survival." And survival in the face of annihilation was enough to transform a species. In Rio, Sergeant Hale lay beneath a shattered roof, coughing blood. He was barely alive, his body ruined, but when they told him the bombs had turned, his lips cracked.
Into a grin. "They thought pain was our weakness," he rasped.
Turns out it was theirs. And humanity believed him. The galaxy, too, took notice. Images of the burning fleet spread faster than light. Across distant stars, the oppressed whispered of a species that had defied the Orokai. The hunters had bled. The invincible had fallen. And yet, even in the ashes of victory, dread remained. The scourge bombs had not destroyed everything. Fragments of the fleet had survived. Shrakul had survived. His fury was not gone. It was sharpened. The warlord limped from the wreckage of his flagship onto a carrier that had escaped the implosion. His armor was scorched, one eye blinded, his claws dripping blood from his own wounds. His soldiers knelt, but he struck them.
"Aside! Do not kneel," he snarled. "Rise! This is not defeat. This is not the end. This is rebirth." But even as he spoke, he saw the tremor in their eyes. His warriors no longer believed him.
They had seen the impossible, and belief is harder to rebuild than ships. Still, Shrakul swore to himself, if the galaxy thought the Orokai broken, he would show them what a cornered predator could do. On Earth, humanity braced. They had turned. The predator's weapon back upon him, but they knew this was not the end. A wounded beast is most dangerous when it crawls from its own grave. The question was no longer whether humanity could endure. They had proved that already. The question now was whether they could finish what they had started. Above the planet, debris still burned in the atmosphere. The night sky glowed red for weeks, as if the heavens themselves were bleeding. Children pointed at falling wreckage and called it the predator's tears. Soldiers swore oaths under that burning sky, and far away, in the shadow of a ruined fleet, Shrakul sharpened his claws. His pride had been wounded, but his hatred was alive. He would not stop until he had drowned Earth in its own defiance. The war was no longer about conquest. It was about vengeance. The scourge bombs have annihilated most of the Orokai fleet, but Shrakul survives. Humanity has tasted survival, the galaxy has taken notice, and the predator warlord vows to return with vengeance, sharper than ever. The night sky still burned when the Orokai came back. Not in fleets, not in the proud lines of warships that once blotted out suns. That glory had been torn from them, left smouldering in Earth's orbit. No, what returned were packs. Broken fragments of the Empire, lean and feral, unleashed by Shrakul, not to conquer, but to hunt. They slipped through the shadows of ruined cities, their ships cloaked, their boots silent on scorched ground. They no longer fought in ranks. They stalked. They carved into tunnels, dragged survivors from rubble, strung their bodies high in the ruins as warnings. This was no longer war, it was predation, and yet even this failed to break humanity. In Chicago, a band of survivors found their families crucified across collapsed skyscrapers. They wept, they screamed, and then they loaded their rifles and went hunting. Days later, the Orokai pack that had stalked them lay gutted in an alley, their blood smeared across the walls in the shape of human handprints. In Delhi, civilians, armed with nothing but kitchen knives and Molotovs, turned their district into a maze of fire. The Orokai entered, laughing. They left burning. The predators had shifted tactics, but so had the prey. For every horror Shrakul unleashed, humanity answered with something worse. He scattered his packs to terrorize. Humans scattered themselves to bleed them out. He hunted civilians. Civilians became hunters. The line between soldier and survivor disappeared. The planet itself was turning into a weapon. Still, the toll was brutal. Humanity endured, but endured bleeding. Children starved, cities collapsed into ash. Disease spread through bunkers and sewers. The Orocai's shadow war carved scars not just into bodies, but into minds. And in the midst of it all, Sergeant Hale lingered like a ghost, too broken to fight on the front lines. He became the voice that bound the resistance. His broadcasts, rasped through failing lungs, carried across hidden radios. They think we're prey in their maze. But they don't know we built this maze. We know every street, every tunnel, every shadow. Let them come. Every step they take, they walk into our teeth. The Orocai heard those words too. Some mocked them, others shivered. Shrakul heard them most of all. From the bridge of his crippled carrier, he watched reports flicker in, packs slaughtered in ambushes, hunters devoured by the hunted. The more he unleashed, the more Earth seemed to consume. His warlords urged retreat. "We have bled enough," they hissed. "The galaxy is watching. We are exposed." But Shrakul's pride was a wound he could not let scab. "You speak."
"Of retreat?" he growled. "You speak of shame? If the galaxy watches, let them watch us finish what we began. No prey leaves the hunt alive." Yet doubt crawled into his ranks. Even the fiercest warriors whispered that the humans were not
prey at all. They spoke of cursed flesh, of demons that turned pain into blades. Shrakul silenced the whispers with executions. He tore out the throats of those who faltered. Still the rot spread. Terror is a disease that eats faster than steel. On Earth, the resistance discovered something startling. Captured Orocai no longer boasted, no longer sneered. They begged. They shook. They whispered to their captors, "Kill us quickly. Don't make us bleed like you do." It was a turning point. The predators feared captivity more than death. They feared the slow endurance of pain, the very thing humans had mastered. And so humanity twisted the knife. They stopped executing prisoners cleanly. They let the Orocai watch as their comrades bled out, slowly, defiantly, whispering human
curses until their last breath. It was not cruelty. It was a message. This is what you taught us. This is what you made us become.
The galaxy heard that message too. The name Earth began to ripple through the stars, not as a graveyard, but as a warning. Traders who once laughed at the idea of human resistance now spoke of them with reverence, even fear. Smugglers carried weapons to Earth at great risk. Mercenary guilds began sending recruits, not for money, but for honor. The Orocai's aura of invincibility had cracked. Humanity was prying it open, one wound at a time, but Shrakul still had claws. If Pax could not break the humans, he would turn the entire planet into their tomb. He gathered the remnants of his fleets, those still loyal enough to kneel, and prepared the next horror. It was no longer about conquest. It was no longer about empire. It was about hate. Shrakul would not erase humanity to rule the galaxy. He would erase humanity so he would never again see their eyes in his nightmares. On Earth, Hale sensed it coming. He spoke to his soldiers, in a voice barely more than a whisper. "We've dragged them into the mud with us. But the mud's not enough. They'll come again, with fire, with everything they have left. We have one choice. Bleed them dry, or burn with them." His words
sank deep.
Across the ruins, survivors prepared, not for life, but for legend. If the Orocai returned in force, humanity would not run. They would carve their names into the predator's bones, and so the stage was set. The prey had become hunters. The hunters had become haunted. The war had become something darker, something that would decide not just the fate of Earth, but the meaning of survival itself. Shrakul's hatred rose like a tide. Hale's defiance burned like a dying star. Both knew the next strike would decide everything. The Orokai's shadow war has failed to break humanity. Packs of hunters return only to become prey. Shrakul prepares his final horror. An all-out strike meant not to conquer, but to annihilate. Humanity braces for the storm, ready to bleed or burn. The final storm began without warning. At dawn, the sky above Earth split open, not with fleets in ordered ranks, not with precision or discipline, but with fury. Shrakul had emptied the last vaults of his empire, gathering every ship, every weapon, every beast that could still crawl to war. His pride demanded nothing less than total ruin. The horizon blazed as fire rained down. Cities that had survived a dozen battles were erased in a single bombardment. Oceans boiled, mountains cracked, forests became ash in seconds. It was not conquest, it was execution. On the ground, survivors had expected this. They had seen it, coming in Hale's hollow eyes. They met the fire not with screams but with grim preparation. They had dug trenches deep into bedrock, hollowed subways into bunkers, turned sewers into arsenals. And when the Orokai descended, they did not find prey cowering. They found prey waiting. The battle of Earth's end began. In the ruins of Cairo, Orokai legions marched through dust storms, only to vanish in explosions as entire blocks collapsed onto them. In the scorched plains of Kansas, survivors on motorcycles dragged chains of mines behind them, weaving through predator lines, igniting death in their wake. In Moscow's broken avenues, a single squad of humans held a crossroads for 6 hours,
against 3 times their number. They fought until only one remained, standing on shattered knees, firing blind, screaming through blood-choked lungs. By the time he fell, the Orokai had turned back, and still the predators pressed on. Shrakul
himself descended at the spearhead, his armor charred but gleaming, his warblade dripping with the blood of a dozen worlds. His roar shook the ruins, a sound meant to remind the galaxy that the predator still lived. But his roar was met with silence. The humans who faced him did not flinch, did not break ranks, did not scatter. They tightened their grips on their rifles, their knives, their makeshift spears. They stared with eyes sunken from hunger, faces torn by scars. And they stood. The silence was heavier than any scream. It was then Shrakul realized they were no longer fighting to live. They were fighting to carve his death into history. In the command tunnels beneath the Himalayas, Hale lay on a cot, lungs filled with
fire, vision dim. His body had given out weeks ago, but his voice still carried across the resistance network. "This is it," he whispered into the comm. "Bleed them, break them, don't give them the satisfaction of fear. Every step they
take into our world is another scar for them to remember." His words reached soldiers in trenches, civilians in rubble, children clutching knives. Across the planet, humanity rose with one voice. Not a scream, not a cry, but a silence so heavy it drowned out the predator's thunder. The battle turned into slaughter, but not the kind Shrakul imagined. For every human corpse, 3 Orokai fell. For every building leveled, a dozen predators were dragged into fire. Humanity fought not like prey, not even like predators, but like something beyond either, something that had nothing left to lose. the galaxy watched. Smugglers streamed images of burning Orokai ships, of humans charging through smoke with bayonets fixed, of predators weeping in terror as they were dragged into the dark. Entire civilizations whispered, "If they can bleed the Orokai, maybe so can we." The tide began to shift. The Orokai were not just losing Earth. They were losing their empire. But Shrakul did not see empire anymore. He saw only his pride bleeding out in the mud of a world he had meant to erase. He fought at the front, carving through men and women, like they were reeds before a storm, but no matter how many he killed, more came, some with rifles, some with knives, some with nothing but stones. Each one looked him in the eye before they fell. Each one carried silence like a blade. It cut deeper than steel. By dusk the battle spread across the continents. Fires lit the sky brighter than stars. Ash fell like snow. Entire predator legions shattered, not because they lacked strength, but because their hearts had rotted with fear. In the shattered ruins of Berlin, Shrakul cut down his 100th human. His armor was slick with their blood. He raised his warblade to roar, triumph, only to hear laughter. From the rubble, a dying soldier, chest torn open, lay staring up at him. His teeth were red, his lungs rattled, but he laughed. "You can't kill us fast enough," the soldier wheezed. "We already won." And Shrakul, for the first time, hesitated. He saw his reflection in the soldier's eyes, not a god, not a conqueror. Just a beast, cornered, lashing at shadows. He struck the soldier down, but the laughter echoed even after the body stilled. Night fell. Earth burned, and yet humanity still stood, torn, bleeding but unbroken. They had dragged Shrakul's
vengeance into the mud and met it with fire, but the warlord was not finished.
Beneath his armor, beneath his wounds, his pride still burned. If he could not crush them with fleets, if he could not drown them with terror, then he would do it with his own hands. He set his sights on Hale, the voice that had bound the resistance, the scarred ghost who whispered strength into the broken. If Shrakul could tear Hale apart, perhaps humanity's spine would finally snap. He gathered his remaining guard and began the march toward the Himalayas. And in the tunnels beneath, Hale lay in silence, eyes closed, breath shallow. He knew the predator was coming. He could feel it in the earth itself, in the tremors of fire above. He smiled through bloodied lips. Let him come. Shrakul has unleashed his last storm, turning Earth into a battlefield of fire and ruin. Humanity still stands, bleeding but unbroken. Now the warlord himself marches toward the Himalayas to crush Hale, the symbol of human defiance, with his own claws. The Himalayas were burning. The predator fleet had shattered against Earth's stubborn gravity, their wreckage tumbling into snow and stone. Entire peaks cracked as fire rained down, avalanches burying soldiers alive, rivers boiling into steam. And through it all, one figure climbed the mountain passes. Shrakul, last warlord of the Orokai, his warblade glowing hot from endless slaughter. His armor was cracked, his fangs chipped, his body slick with wounds, but his pride remained whole. He would end this war with his hands around the throat of the human who defied him. He would carve silence into silence and finally taste victory again. In the tunnels beneath, Commander Hale could feel him coming.
Each tremor through the stone was like a drumbeat counting down to the end. He could barely stand. His lungs were drowning in blood, but he refused to die in bed. "Help me up," he rasped. Two young soldiers, faces hollowed by weeks of hunger, tried to protest.
"Sir, you—" "Now!" They obeyed. They strapped armor to his frail body, patched with steel plates, scavenged from predator corpses. They placed a rifle in his trembling hands, and when he almost collapsed, they simply tied him to a chair and wheeled him to the command chamber's doorway facing the mountain path. Hale smiled, teeth red. Good enough. The last defenders of Earth waited in silence. They had no fleets left, no air support, no reserves, just rifles, knives, and broken bones. Outside, the blizzard carried the sound of footsteps, iron on stone, slow and steady. Each step was a hammer against their nerves. And then he appeared. Shrakul stepped from the storm like a nightmare made flesh. His war blade dragged sparks from the rock. His eyes glowed with hatred and something else, something bitter he could
not admit. Doubt. The soldiers raised their rifles. Shrakul did not flinch. He spread his arms wide, daring them to fire. "Come then, vermin. Spend your last breath on me. Break your teeth on my bones." No one fired. Not because they feared him, because they were waiting for Hale.
The commander leaned forward in his chair, coughed up blood, and whispered just loud enough to carry, "Welcome to Earth." It was the only signal they needed. The chamber erupted in gunfire, muzzle flashes searing the dark. Shrakul surged
forward like a beast unleashed, rounds sparking off his cracked armor.
He crashed into the line, scattering men like dolls. His blade tore through the first rank, but still they swarmed him. They bit, they clawed, they dragged at his limbs, even as he cut them down. One woman leapt onto his back with nothing but a kitchen knife, driving it again and again between his armor plates until he ripped her in half. A boy no older than 16 jammed a steel pipe through his thigh before being cut down. Every strike slowed him, every wound bled, and yet he pushed forward toward Hale. The commander did not rise. He could not. He simply watched, eyes steady, breath rattling. The warlord crashed through the last of the line, armor smoking, flesh torn, blade dripping. He loomed over Hale, shadow blotting out the firelight. "At last," Shrakul hissed, "the voice of your kind, the ghost that bound you together. I will silence you myself." Hale chuckled, soft and broken. "Silence is ours." He pulled the pin on the grenade hidden in his lap. The explosion ripped through the chamber. Stone collapsed, fire roared, and the shock wave threw Shrakul to the ground. His armor shattered, his blade snapped. He rose, staggering, body ruined, and saw Hale still sitting there, chest gone, eyes dim, smiling with the last of his strength. The warlord roared and stumbled forward, raising his claws, but before he could strike, a dozen hands seized him. The surviving soldiers, burned, broken, half dead, dragged him down. They swarmed his body, pinning him with ropes, chains, bare hands. He tore through them, but each time one fell, another took their place, and then the silence returned. No orders, no screams, no words, just the weight of humanity pressing down, bleeding onto him, refusing to let him stand. For the first time in his life, Shrakul knew fear, not of death, but of being forgotten.
Of becoming nothing more than the monster they buried with their bare hands. He bellowed, but the sound was smothered in the silence. The humans tore his warblade from his grip. They drove it through his chest, pinning him to the stone floor. He
thrashed, howled, clawed at the earth. But their silence held him still. And as the fire spread, as the mountain collapsed around them, the last warlord of the Orokai died in the ruins of Earth, drowned in blood and silence. The war did not end that day, but something greater broke. Across the galaxy, the sight of the Orokai warlord's corpse spread like wildfire. Civilizations that had cowered for centuries rose up, whispering humanity's truth. Pain is our weapon. Silence is our shield. We endure, and in enduring, we win. Earth lay in ashes. Billions were dead, but the survivors looked to the stars, not with fear, but with fire in their eyes. They had beaten back gods with broken bones, and the galaxy would never again mistake them for prey. The Orokai warlord is dead. Earth is in ruins, but humanity is reborn. Not as survivors, but as the spark of a galactic uprising. Their silence has become legend,